All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And Brian, I've been thinking, right? I've got something to say. Brian, you're really fucking gay. I wanted to get on this call to just diss you. You know what I mean? Have you
Well,
have you been feeling that way
Taylor,
about
I
me?
need to tell you something, and I think it's going to leave you reeling. The thing that you just said, it really hurt my feelings, and I'm a little taken aback by having to take all of your flack. But even though I am on the receiving end, you are still my co-host and friend.
Aw, that really sweet. That makes me feel bad for trying to diss you because you respected me, whereas I was disrespecting you. You know what I
I
mean?
rest you.
Exactly. And without further ado, that leads into our topic this week, which is diss tracks, the
The
history of.
wonderful world of the diss track.
Yes, the totally not problematic genre of diss tracks for sure.
There's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on with it.
No, absolutely. So let's get into our subject this week. But before we get into our subject this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week.
Week, 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 week. And you may have heard us announce the subject for this episode and thought, oh, it's going to be like kind of a throwback Millennials World. It's going to be like cultural analysis. It'll be about pop culture. It'll be kind of funny, kind of about history. They've done a lot of episodes about children in pain lately, right? You might have thought you were going to get a reprieve from that in this episode.
No, that's actually a really good fucking point. I hadn't even thought of that until yeah, about what our subject this week is going to be, which is an update on the David case. Now, you're totally right. This is like 4 episodes in a row where we've mentioned children in distress or pain, and this might be the most severe one of all because, of course, we're talking about David. We talked about him pretty early on when the body was first discovered in his Tesla. I want to say maybe like late September, early October. That's when we first covered it.
Yeah, we
But either
basically said
way,
his music sucked, he was cringe, and it wasn't looking good for him, which I think was the consensus at that early stage.
yeah, exactly. Like within the first few days, his stands and his like hangers on were like, that's really weird. There's a body in his Tesla. And then like it just devolved from there. And now we're at where we're at now, which is maybe one of the most degenerate music stories of all time. Like it's got to be in the top 10. This is horrible.
I've been thinking about this. So, Taylor, you'll know, longtime listeners will know, of course, I like to read and kind of about and kind of analyze music history and kind of the themes of music. I also like to follow just the weirdos and the depraved people and the degenerates that are involved in music. And I was thinking about this. The David thing is going to be unique, or it's going to be in a smaller subset because his startup and his artistry was so limited and his period of relevance so small that I think that in 5 or 6 years, already I think the people that 2 years ago, 3 years ago were kids listening to David, they're probably already starting to outgrow him, I think, a lot of them. Like we talk about Michael Jackson, who, there's all sorts of things going on with that case. We've talked about R. Kelly, absolute degenerate monster who regrettably has made some really iconic songs and is really a visionary in his genre of R&B. David, though, isn't going to have that. In 5 or 6 years, when we talk about David, we aren't going to go, oh yeah, he was a singer-songwriter, he was a SoundCloud artist who murdered a kid. We're just going to call him a child murderer. We might say, oh, that was so weird that he had a couple of hits before he murdered that child.
No, absolutely. And his music, the vast majority of it is related to the child murder along with
It's
it. Like,
so
let's be
weird.
very clear. It's so fucking weird. Like, almost all of his songs, and especially pretty much all of his music videos, revolve around this upcoming murder of this child that he did. Like, there's always the thing, and, you are a big proponent of this. I'm not nearly as much of one, I'll be honest with you, but it's a valid, I think, thing in general. But the idea of separating the art from the artist, but there is no doing that with David. His art is directly related to his atrocity. Like, there's literally no separating it.
Couple things. So one of the things I talked about this a little bit on the show, and I've actually written some things about this. Let's think about R. Kelly. So one of the things when we look at his crimes and then his music is that we can see a direct line to like where his criminal actions and his abusive actions, his predatory actions were directly kind of a muse for the music he made. Now, once you know that about him as a songwriter, you see it in his music. The thing with David is even weirder than that. This would sound conspiratorial if it wasn't so on its face, seemingly obvious. It kind of seems like he started to blow up making music and then he developed this fantasy of murdering a romantic partner. And all of his music videos, they sort of seem to align around that. To the point that, remember, he murdered this child. He abandoned her body like trash in his trash Tesla car. And he went on tour for his first studio album. And he had like things like in the lobby of his venues where he was doing concerts, he had like a casket. He has songs on this album with titles like Afterlife. First big hit was called Romantic romantic homicide. Then you think about how carelessly discarded of this poor girl's remains, and you think, was this murder and like committing it and then getting caught? Was this like his grand artistic statement? Because think about it, he releases his studio album, kills this kid, and he goes off on a tour. He has this casket in the venues where he's doing concerts, and it's just can almost trace a clear line through the songs he released, the lyrical content leading up to this kid's murder. And there's even songs on this debut studio album he did that seem to be like kind of like mourning slash bragging about, you know, a dead lover. Like, is it possible that he intended for the world to find this and then go like, oh, he's such a psycho mastermind, he killed this kid? Because again, like you alluded to the music videos too. Do you want to talk about some of his music videos and the manga bullshit?
Yes. So I'm going to talk about two of the most prominent ones and the ones that I believe are the most streamed. At least they are on YouTube because I don't really use Spotify. And the two big ones are Romantic Homicide and then Here With Me, and those music videos in there. That music video has a girl where he's like living with her and having a romantic interest. And at the very end, he's by himself as an old man. And girl in the music video looks a lot like Celeste. Obviously, older
all of
version
his music
of
videos
Celeste. And
have
then
someone that looks so much like this girl. It's very unsettling.
Yes, in a Romantic Homicide, very similar. In a Romantic Homicide, you know, there's the line of, I killed you and I don't even regret it. I didn't cry. Like, I mean, come on. It is so fucking obvious. But I will say, you know, you're talking about the whole, like, did he set up his whole music career as, you know, basically a fantasy and writing in these lyrics, this sort of fantasy and eventually it coming to fruition? I do feel like that's true, but I think the way it was so hastily done, I think, and I know this is going to sound fucking just so crazy, but like, I think he was planning on doing it much later. Like, he was going to have some like grand serial killer sadistic like death for her. But, you know, there's the allegations that she was going to, you know, expose him and blah, blah, blah. And he just got so upset that his like grand plan
just
got
like,
thwarted.
we're doing it now.
Yeah, he just took it out on her like immediately. Like, not even a crime of passion, but he was just sort of like, all right, I'm going to have like 24 hours to plan this and I'm just going to stab her and just get it over with kind of thing. Like, I think that's what was going to happen. Because like, in all honesty, if he had gotten to where he had wanted to get to eventually, he would have like made a fucking snuff film with this girl. And to be fair, there might be a fucking snuff film of this girl for all the fuck we know.
Yeah.
Like, my theory is that it would be so much more involved than what eventually happened, which is why this seems so hastily done. Like, obviously, the cutting her up in pieces with the fucking chainsaw and the kiddie pool and buying it under a fake name or whatever, like, that was the best part of his plan, and that was already pretty fucking stupid in the first place. Like,
yeah, he was pretty fucked by that point, like, in the long run. Like,
and the fact he got away with this for seemingly 4 months, because the last time that there was any activity on her phone was back in April, and her body wasn't found till early September. So it's one of those things where, like, the fact he got away with this for so long is actually genuinely fucking shocking, to be honest with you. And I didn't necessarily want to bring it up on this episode, but I think it's a perfect time to say it. Like, we obviously don't know all the details of what's going on with, you know, Celeste and her family, or Celeste's family, I should say. But, like, they are at the very least extremely negligent, at the very fucking bare minimum. Because, like, how do you have a 13 or 14-year-old child who's running away from home all the fucking time, who's hanging out with a guy? And by the way, I think the dad said, I was just watching a video today as a recording, where the dad was like, I didn't know anything about him or whatever, but, like, they knew his name was David. They knew who he was.
They knew he was an adult, right?
Yeah, they knew he was an adult. And on top of it, too, Celeste traveled internationally with David. Like, I'm not going to say that he's some master, you know, forger of international travel documents, because he certainly could be. I mean, he's certainly rich and influential enough to where he could get, like, forged documents, travel internationally. But my guess is that he probably didn't. And if that's the case, then they signed off on travel documents for her, a 13 to 14-year-old child, whenever this London trip happened, to travel with an adult celebrity? Come on. There is some, I would argue, pretty criminal negligence with her parents. They should at the very least have their records and everything blown the fuck up by the police. Like, the police need to investigate her parents for some criminal negligence, to be honest with you. Like, I genuinely feel that way. And if it wasn't for the international trip, I would be a little bit more like, you know, give them a little bit more leeway or whatever. But they once again traveled to a different continent with an adult man when she was in fucking middle school. I mean, come on.
If I understand right, Celeste had ran away with David before, right? And then come back home.
Multiple times. She was first reported missing like a year before the alleged murder happened.
She was reported missing, and then I think she came back home after several months. And then, I don't know. Again, I'm trying to reserve judgment on things with the parents.
There's some fuckery going on with her family, like, straight up. Like I said, at the very bare minimum, negligence. Maybe not criminal negligence, I will reserve that, but at the same time, there is some horrific parental negligence that should not be forgiven by her parents. I'm just being fully honest. Her parents do have some blame on this, in my opinion. Obviously not nearly as much as David, who murdered this child. but at the same time, there should be some condemnation for at least whatever fucking style of parenting they gave her. It was pretty fucking piss poor, seemingly. I'll say that. Pretty embarrassingly bad.
One of the things I think that's really interesting to me, not one of the most troubling things about this case, but one of the things that kind of sticks in my craw for our purposes, as a podcast that talks about the things we talk about, is that David, well, first of all, I mean, and this in itself isn't that weird that he was so famous so quickly, because there's a thing that you will see from millennials, from Gen X, from anyone that isn't younger, that isn't like a Gen Z, and maybe even, you might even have to be like a younger Gen Z, but I've seen people go like, who even was David? They don't understand it. They kind of can't accept that he was a massive celebrity for the last year or so, and they're kind of like, just some guy online, how did this even, and you kind of have to go like, well, yeah, he was, and that's kind of the fucked up thing, but he was a celebrity to that age group. He had a song that premiered on Invincible,
No, exactly. He has multiple songs that have reached hundreds of millions. I mean, he has billions of streams. He wasn't just some artist that nobody ever fucking heard of, and they're like, yeah, just some SoundCloud rapper with 20 subscribers who went on a mass murder campaign like that one guy in Highland Park or whatever. You know what I mean? I think he was somebody. Yeah. He was somebody with a fan base, and it's
one of those things where trajectory.
Oh, absolutely. Legit. And I'm gonna say one thing real quick. So there's this one joke that I hear that's just so not true, where they say David made bars so good that he ended up behind them, and it's no, he didn't. His beats were terrible. His beats were so boring. They were free soundboard level bullshit.
I think some of them are.
No, absolutely. I'm not gonna say that he was the worst musician ever, but he was so middling. There really wasn't anything that impressive about him. The horrifying aspect of him setting up this seeming fantasy to murder this child makes it even that much worse. But even if this hadn't happened, he would have been a solid 4.5 out of 10 artist. Very mediocre.
Well, one of the things kind of tying in with that's so weird about this, we've talked about this in a few different aspects from a few different angles on the show, is how the position of the artist, of the musician, of the songwriter, of the filmmaker has kind of it's kind of bled into content creation, right? And David very clearly, and this is not necessarily a value judgment, but I think it feeds into how he had the type of relationship he did with his audience, is he was making music as content, right? So he starts off as a Fortnite streamer. I know we talked about this a little bit when we previously talked about David when the case broke. So his Fortnite streams are getting copyright strikes. So he starts making his own music. Just kind of boring pop R&B. I know people get mad when you call this pop or R&B, but that's what it is. And I love R&B. It's bad R&B by a guy that can't really sing, right? So he kind of out of necessity is making this music, by all accounts, as background music for his fucking Let's Plays and his fucking streams. And it blows up. And so he just kind of keeps doing it. But he's kind of doing the thing of content creation, right? He's clearly learned this more as an influencer than as a songwriter. He's thinking about optimizing and streams, and he's building that kind of streamer influencer relationship with his audience. And it kind of gets to this weird place where all of these things are sort of bleeding together, and you've got musicians and songwriters and influencers and vloggers and whoever all kind of floating around in the same space. And David has a type of accessibility to his fan base that someone who maybe came, not to say that there have never been predators in traditional hip-hop or alternative music or whatever, I don't mean to imply that, but sort of gives him a different dynamic with his fan base than someone roughly maybe just a little bit older than him, say The Weeknd would have, because he's coming up and he's taking this kind of influencer vlogger approach to being a popular musician. It's very weird, and I think that, not trying to say that everyone that approaches music as content creation or as an influencer is going to be like David, but I think that's sort of one of the weirder sides to seeing traditional media gateways kind of break down, is that you're seeing the parasocial thing move beyond streamers, move beyond bread tubers, and you're going to see moving more and more into music, into filmmaking. It's going to be part of how now musicians think about their audience. It's going to be part of how probably directors and actors think about their audience, with this parasocial thing in mind, which to a degree, if you're a content creator, if you're a podcaster, if you're a YouTuber, you kind of have to, even if you don't, you have to kind of be aware of the parasocial element. Well, that's going to become an element in everything now, in every type of art or content or whatever you want to call it. And it's going to cause the relationship between the fan and the artist or the creator or the journalist and the subject to shift in some very weird ways, I think.
No, absolutely. And, speaking of that as a bit of a cliffhanger, I think we'll leave the David subject for now, because there there is certainly a lot more to talk about in the future with that, and we'll obviously come back to it at the very least before the trial concludes. But either way, we're talking about disrespecting a mediocre artist. Let's get back into our subject, which is diss tracks. Now, Brian, this was your subject for this week. I'm not nearly as, I guess, aware of the history of diss tracks. I mean, obviously, I know what they are. I've certainly heard some of them.
Sure.
But at the same time, get into a real quick history of diss tracks. Like, why is this something that really interested you that you wanted to cover as a subject for this week?
So for the show, I've been thinking about this for a while. I wanted to talk about diss tracks, not necessarily in a typical going by what are the best diss tracks, what are the meanest ones, what are the hardest bars, what are the most notorious diss tracks. I didn't really want to do that. One of the things that I was interested in was how the diss track originates in hip hop and, kind of moves into other genres, but also how its function has shifted over the decades. Hip hop, for all intents and purposes, as we know it, really it emerges about 50 years ago, right? New York dance parties, 70s, block parties, house parties, DJ Kool Herc, all that shit. And you already have what you might call a diss tracks there. You've got what's the whole thing of an MC is that they're the master of ceremonies. And at that point, they host the DJ. The main draw, the focus is the DJ. But the master of ceremonies has to get up there and he has to brag and he has to talk about how he's the best. What's the natural thing that grows out of talking about how you're the best? Well, it's talking about people that aren't as good as you, right? But even this doesn't come out full form from like the New York dance scene, right? It's part of a much longer tradition, and certainly there are people that know a lot more about this. There are whole academic studies and books on this, but it's part of the tradition of the dozens. Like, I remember explaining this to my dad when I was in like middle school, or maybe like high school, and he like thought I was making it up. He had a very dismissive attitude towards like hip hop and kind of, to be honest, towards like black culture in general and things. Dozens originates from West Africa. It is probably 300 years old or longer than that. It's basically like tied into oral traditions of storytelling and kind of spoken word poetry and verbal sparring. Like, that's ultimately what it came down to. It's an element of verbal sparring with an opponent. It's based on emphasizing like metaphor and humor. As far as we can tell back then, it was probably had an element of exhibition to it as sort of a game. And a lot of the time was just like in rap music, you'll see a good amount of the time was probably fairly friendly, right? It was probably fairly sportsmanlike, but there's this emphasis on like verbally dominating your opponent with humor, with speed, with improvisation, with metaphor and simile. And this carries to the Americas. Once African slaves start getting moved to North America, they bring elements of this to them. And it kind of, over the decades, over the centuries, it sort of morphs to the American culture. There are blues artists like in the 20s and 30s who talk about the dozens, who would like play guitar and kind of make fun of each other back and forth. And it's shockingly not too dissimilar from like what you would see a freestyle rap battle in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, or today be like. Once this filters through to hip hop, I think it reaches a form where it can finally be kind of commercialized in a certain way. A record like that, you might see a blues artist do something like a little sparring thing as they're playing guitar back and forth in like some blues club. You might even hear it occasionally on a record, but it's kind of a hard thing to market on a mass scale. It's a hard thing to market to a white audience, or even just a hard thing to market to, a black audience that isn't directly in that community, right? But with hip hop, you've got the MC who's this charismatic person, and they talk about how they're the best, and they keep the party moving. They start to compete, and as early as the 80s, you see diss tracks, but they're mostly, I don't want to say they're never sincerely angry. Certainly some of them are, but it's kind of about sparring still. It's about reaching, it's about originality, it's about like, I'm the best MC, I do this, and it's still kind of based in dance music. As the aesthetics of hip hop shift, the meaning kind of changes. It becomes more politicized. That's kind of in the late 80s, you see KRS-One does a lot of kind of infamous diss tracks, and it focuses more on the East-West Coast divide. There's a lot of regional and cultural things. Still probably, in my take on those songs is that they're rough, but they're still about artistry. They're still about, I'm the better rapper, I'm the more original rapper, you're copying me. But as the genre morphs, this doesn't fall by its wayside, and it doesn't stay to rap music. It becomes tied to gangster rap, and it becomes, pretty famously, you look at Tupac and Biggie Smalls and Mobb Deep and things, it becomes an extension of that. It becomes one more vehicle of violence. I shouldn't say vehicle of violence. That's unfair. That's an oversimplification, but it's one more way, along with violence, along with any of this competition, to really try to damage your opponent in this way, and to damage their legitimacy in the eyes of the broader public. What I think is interesting about this is how constantly the diss track, as it remains, that is a rap track, or I guess it could be a rock track now, which we'll get into. It's moved kind of beyond the parameters of rap, although its format format is still specific to hip hop as a culture, I would say. It always exists. Over the last 50 years, it has continuously existed. It's continuously been an important part of the genre, but it always serves a different function. Now you'll see it serves a very particular function that seems to have less to do with music and similar to what we talked about before, more to do with social media, which I find really interesting.
As you just mentioned, obviously, that diss tracks used to be kind of good-hearted and good-natured, which is totally the opposite of my understanding of what diss tracks are in the modern era. Like, when I think of diss track, I think of something like No Vaseline. Like, that is
which is one of the best ever.
Oh, absolutely. But it's one of the least, like, good-hearted, kind-spirited things I could possibly imagine when it comes to a song. Talking about somebody who you used to work with professionally, at least had somewhat of a healthy, like, business relationship with.
And basically a song about how they're like the lowest form of life you could possibly imagine, right? And you're completely stripping away whatever dignity they have in the eyes of your audience to this song.
No, absolutely. And like, talk about some other diss tracks, like some notable ones. Like, I was going to bring up some nu metal diss tracks, because that's certainly a genre I'm more familiar with than pretty much any era of hip hop that I can think of. Even like white hip hop, I'm not a huge knower of. I know of Eminem, obviously, but I was going to bring up some nu metal ones. Like, Slipknot's second ever single was a diss track, which a lot of people forget about, but it's also the song they usually end their shows with, which is Spit It Out. Now, Brian, have you heard Spit It Out? I'm sure you have.
I have heard Spit It Out. I was not aware that it was like a diss track, so to speak.
Yeah, it's diss track more towards, I think there was like some like local journalists when they were first like growing as a band that said that they were basically going to be has-beens by like 5 years in, which making a song about that in 1999 was certainly a choice. Obviously that was like the 80s and 90s really were the golden era of like diss tracks, at least in my opinion. But and also that song is just so hilariously cringe to me in a lot of ways. And obviously it's 9 guys from Iowa dressing up in clown outfits and boiler suits to rap and play like nu metal inspired like death metal. You know what I mean? Like, it's obviously going to be pretty fucking corny, but at the same time, it's one of those songs that is still played in pretty heavy rotation on their set list for a reason, because it's very iconic. And another one, Brian, this is probably my single favorite diss track I'm going to bring up, which is the Limp Bizkit song Hot Dog, which is a diss track towards Trent Reznor, which is hilarious.
Yeah, I am familiar with Hot Dog, and this is one of the...
And you know what's even more hilarious about that one real quick is that whenever that song gets played, they have to give all the money to Trent Reznor because they said the line, "Fuck you like an animal." That's an actual true story. Trent Reznor owns the rights to that song because they sampled him that egregiously.
So I guess he won ultimately. In the eyes of the wider culture, I would argue that Trent Reznor probably won this pretty decisively.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I love Limp Bizkit and I love Fred Durst. He's just so wholesome in comparison to like a lot of modern celebrities, which you would have not have said in 1999 and 2000, 2001. But he's very like wholesome now. And obviously, Trent Reznor is somebody who is very accomplished. I think he has like fucking a few Academy Awards at this point. Like, he is an incredibly accomplished and, critically lauded musician who is basically kind of the elder statesman of like electronic music at this fucking point. Like, he is somebody who is a legend in basically every aspect. And of course, once again, Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit are legends in their respective fields. But at the same time, like, Trent Reznor can outsell like massive stadiums. I mean, wasn't he just at Coachella, if I'm not mistaken?
He was just at Coachella, but also he does like scores for Disney movies and shit. Like, he has definitely transcended. Like, I would actually argue that that's kind of corny. I don't really...
I mean, he does soundtracks for fucking David Fincher movies at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, really.
Like, there was a point in time where you would argue that Limp Bizkit and Trent Reznor that Fred and Trent were kind of in the same general post-grunge, heavy music, alt-rock, mainstream sphere, but maybe Trent was a little more critically lauded. I would say now that they're not even in the same kind of areas of the industry.
Oh, no, not even fucking close. I mean, Limp Bizkit, once again, I love Limp Bizkit. I will always say that. But Limp Bizkit are very much on the nostalgia, like, bent of their arc, which is fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I mean,
and they put out a new album once in a while where they rock out, and then people that like them like the new album where they rock out. It's fine.
Absolutely. But, like I said, with Coachella, like, Trent Reznor is going to fucking Coachella, and Trent Reznor is, an Oscar award-winning fucking film composer. Like, it's not even the same fucking industry anymore. Whereas back in 1999, 2000, 2001, they were in a similar industry. So it makes sense that there was a diss track even made. And then the other one that I think is probably the biggest cringy one and probably the least good of these songs, I mean, it's obviously the least good of these songs, and it's extremely cringy, is All in the Family by Korn, which you talk about obviously the more playful diss track. That was a way more playful diss track, but holy shit is it bad. It's the worst Korn song of the 90s. I would argue it's at least bottom 5 Korn songs ever, and I'm including the fucking dubstep album album they made.
You got to think it is a well-produced song. Like it makes sense that in that moment, especially, and it was really edgy. So for Korn's audience at that time, kind of a surefire hit. The thing with All in the Family is, of course, like lyrics are offensive and they're puerile and they're stupid in a way that is not true of most new metal, believe it or not. But it's also like normally I don't think things being dated is inherently a bad thing. Things are reflective of the time when they came out. That is not the fault of a piece. That is not necessarily a knock. It's not inherently good or bad, right? That's kind of one of the main points of our podcast when we started, right? Is that things having a marker of their era, it's important and it's relevant and it's not a reason to disregard something or to hold it up. It's part of how you should evaluate it. All in the Family is in a very detrimental way dated in that you look at that and you go, there is no moment before or after this year when this song possibly could have come out and been like a hit song.
No, that's a good point. Like that song could have only came out in 1998. It could have not came out in 1997 or 1999. It had to come out in 1998. It is the
Couldn't
most
have come out
fucking
during the
dated
grunge
thing.
era.
Yeah.
Couldn't have come out during the grunge era. Too many like the Riot Girl thing and too much like heady kind of emotional. Couldn't have come out post 9/11. People don't want to hear that goofy shit. It's insincere.
Oh no, absolutely. It is not good. And like I said, I'm a huge Korn fan, and I think literally all of Korn's songs in the 90s are at least good, except for that. That is the only bad Korn song of the 90s. And like I said, it is by far the worst Korn song of the 90s. Not even a question. But those are some of the three that I wanted to mention when it came to diss tracks specifically. And, talk about diss tracks, about their impact, right? Like obviously I mentioned No Vaseline, which is maybe the most infamous diss track I can think of. And there was so many artists in the 90s, but there was one specifically about MC Hammer that I just can't think of the name of at the moment.
So one of the things is a lot of people cut from Hammer's cloth got dissed. When the gangsta rap thing came out, the only one that I know of, I think, is Third Base. Did an MC Hammer diss that was actually kind of controversial because Third Base were early white rappers. They're great. They did the Cactus album, but they're kind of early examples in the mainstream of kind of what we'd call lyrical white guy nerd rappers. So they're kind of making fun of Hammer from that perspective. He's a dance guy. He's kind of a clown. He's pop rap, which is all valid as a criticism. I like MC Hammer. I think that's a fun record. The Hammer Don't Hurt Him. But a lot of these kind of pop rap guys who, let's be fair, were innovators. They were very important to the genre. But when some of the kind of either the more artistic underground rappers or even funnier, when the gangster rappers started making fun of the pop rap guys, it's some of the funniest shit. Uncle Luke has one of my favorite diss tracks from the early 90s ever called Pussy Ass Kid and Hoe Ass Play. Now, the idea of doing a diss track about Kid and Play.
About Kid and Play, that is so fucking hilarious. Like, couldn't be less, like, nice and goofy guys from the looks of them.
Because gangsta rap started to happen, and part of this might have been that they genuinely were put off by it. Part of it might have been that they were feeling insecure and maybe commercially, like, defensive, is that they did the thing a lot of the pop rappers do when gangsta rap comes out. They go, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, I don't think kids should be listening to this, parents shouldn't be buying these records for their kids, this is violent, this is sexist, this is all this stuff. And maybe they were being sincere. But some of the burgeoning gangsta, and I wouldn't even call Uncle Luke a gangster rapper per se, he's just like kind of a harder rapper that was starting to come into vogue, but like gangster per se to me, I'm not going to say the whole line, I'm going to let you guys fill in the blanks. One of my favorite diss tracks ever, because one of the things is that a good diss track is really mean and really funny. I'm not going to talk about, like everyone talked about the Kendrick Drake thing. Now, many songs released there. The reason everyone remembers Not Like Us by Kendrick is because it's funny. Like,
well,
the other songs
it's funny, like, and like, it obviously we all know this, but Kendrick won that beef like nobody's fucking business. I mean, they played it at the fucking Super Bowl. I mean, come the fuck on.
So the Uncle Luke song, Pussy Ass Kid and Hoe Ass Play, has the lyric, your second movie was a flop. Man, it figures. 2 house parties for 2 house. And it's such a good line.
Real quick, we're talking about the white rapper sort of diss track. Like, obviously Eminem had some amazing diss tracks. I mean, obviously I remember the Will Smith, he doesn't have to cuss to sell records. Well, I do, so fuck him and fuck you too, or whatever. Like, that's
Eminem and a few other people. He wasn't the first to do this. And in fact, No Vaseline is kind of a precursor to this. As rap gets more outwardly aggressive, and of course, Eminem, because he has to exist in this space as a white guy, he kind of makes himself the most over-the-top guy, kind of puts himself in a way where he's like, I need to be like the craziest guy here so that these like black guys can't ignore me. Like, that is legitimate. Like, but there's this thing of like every line in your song becomes a diss on someone else. We think of that as an Eminem thing, but you look at that and like Eazy-E was doing that. And of course, No Vaseline is similar to that. It's just like like him going after a line of people. Eminem, a lot of them aren't on his albums. Taylor, I'm sure you're familiar with Girls.
No, actually, I'm not familiar with this song at all. Tell me about it.
Okay, Girls is a hidden track off of the D12 album Devil's Night. It is specifically about, it's kind of about Kid Rock, it's kind of about Everlast, it's kind of about DJ Lethal, it's mostly about Fred Durst. How much of the actual specifics of the Durst-Eminem feud do you know? Like, I know you're aware of it, I know you know about Limp Bizkit and shit, but like, how much of the actual evolution of their relationship do you know about?
Well, the only thing I can think of really when it comes to that was there a bit of a rivalry between Fred and Eminem when it came to their like romantic interests,
No.
if I'm not mistaken?
No, as far as I know, I don't think either of them particularly care. So Eminem, like everyone, he made fun of Fred Durst. The thing with Durst and Eminem specifically is that they kind of were, I think they were both had the same management early on. And, there's some overlap between some of the people that would listen to Eminem and some of the people that would listen to early nu metal. Of course, you know that. There's big differences, but there's a segment of their fan bases that overlapped. So Eminem did not like Everlast.
I mean, who does?
Right, because so I think House of Pain are pretty fun. That corny What It's Like song is kind of like, I respect him for doing a pro-choice lyric in that era. Like, that's kind of cool, but like, it's corny. It's just fucking corny, right? And DJ Lethal, pre-Biscuit, was a member of House of Pain. So there's some tit for tat between Everlast and Eminem. Similar to Moby, Everlast goes for this thing where he says, I don't like the things Eminem says. He's sexist, he's homophobic, all of which is true, like at the time. That is objectively true about Eminem's lyrics. But it's also kind of, I think there was this feeling by Eminem and maybe by the wider culture that you had these paunchy older white guys that were kind of saying that, but there was sort of a feeling that these older guys like Moby or Everlast were saying that for kind of like PC points, right? Because they were no longer relevant and this was a way for them to kind of have something against like up and coming kind of edgier artists. So Eminem does this song Quitter, which is all about Everlast. It's about how he used to rap and now he gets cracker white boy country blues hop, which is what Eminem calls it. And he specifically posits in that song that Limp Bizkit opened a show for House of Pain in 94 and were so much better that Everlast saw them and quit to join Limp Bizkit. Quit House of Pain for Limp Bizkit. This is pretty much true. Everlast has basically said, yeah, we played some shows with Limp Bizkit and I just thought they were great. I thought that was like the future and I thought they rocked, so I left for them. He never says that he didn't like House of Pain anymore, but that's kind of the subtext, right?
Sorry, you know what's hilarious about that real quick is that that's the total opposite experience of Wes Borland, who was in the band. He's like, oh, this band sucks shit. And then he left for a little bit. And then he eventually came back when they were starting to get big. That's hilarious.
That's sort of like the issue with nu metal, right? Is it was very briefly, it was this music, this rock music of the future. And almost as soon as that happened, it became a rock music of the past. Eminem is, for whatever reason, he's aware of this. Probably again, because he's just in the same sphere. He had done the first Warped Tour, which was mostly a nu metal tour in the 90s. I think he actually was on there with Korn and Limp Bizkit, But according to Eminem, Fred was supposed to be on this Whitey Ford Everlast diss track. Was gassing him up with saying, yeah, Everlast is fucking corny. He's always talking shit. He's old. He's boring. He doesn't know shit about anything. He's out of it. Was kind of getting Eminem all gassed up to do this diss track. According to Eminem, he's in the studio. He's calling up Fred Durst and saying, hey, I'm in the studio. I'm doing this diss track. Fuck Everlast. And all of a sudden, Fred Durst is like, no, man, I'm really busy. I really can't make it. And kind of flakes out. It's all by him. He goes, okay, whatever. He does the diss track. It's one of my favorite diss tracks. Not on any album. It's called Quitter. Really shouldn't be quoting rap lyrics. It does not work for my voice and my whole vibe. Quitter ends with a remix of Hit 'Em Up by Tupac, where Eminem says about Everlast, you claim to be a Muslim, but you're Irish white. Again, that's just a perfect diss line. But then the song gets leaked. Everlast is like really offended. He's talking about how he's going to kick Eminem's ass. And then DJ Lethal and Fred Durst are publicly like, yeah, I can't believe he said that about Everlast. That's our homie. We're going to kick Eminem's ass when we see him. Now, I have no idea if Fred Durst told Eminem that he also hated Everlast and wanted to do this back with him, and then did an about face out. Only ever heard that from Eminem, right? But after that, Eminem does a hidden track all about Fred Durst called Girls. And the thing is, when we talk about Eminem's diss tracks, he's known for being really funny, and he usually is. He did Cannabis about cannabis. He, of course, did the Whitey Ford song. But his diss tracks, especially his unreleased diss tracks, there's sort of like this thing where it's like, oh, he hates the person he's singing about. Maybe not unconditionally, but in this moment, when you listen to Girls, it's just like, oh, he just hated Fred Durst for a second here.
Well, that's the thing, obviously, about Eminem, right, is that, we talked about how he's very funny. He's also obviously very intelligent. He's, you know, the lyrical miracle spiritual. No, I'm kidding. He's not backpack rap. At the same time, like Eminem is somebody who is very passionate emotionally, like incredibly passionate, whether it's
He's a hot couch guy.
No, absolutely. Whether it's positive, passionate, or like extremely negative, but he has like this hyper fixation at any given moment about what he wants to talk about, and he will fucking make a song about it. He will write some bars about it. He will write pages in his fucking notebook about it. It's almost kind of like either an OCD or almost like, and I don't think he is either of these things, but either like an OCD or like autistic, like hyperfixation level interest in that particular moment on whatever he wants to fucking talk about. And I very much admire that.
So Eminem was one of the first musical artists I ever loved. Like, he's up there with Pink Floyd for me as like a foundational, an artist who helped me discover my own independent identity as a music fan, right? So I went through a period of time in my youth where I really loved him. I went through a period of time where I was kind of like a hip online forums, you know, white rap fan, and I was like, I don't listen to Eminem. I only listen to 80s hip hop, and I listen to LP and MF Doom, and I listen to Odd Future. But then I kind of came back around to where I like him. You know, I think he's just another times a great rapper of that era. I've come full circle to be able to appreciate him while also having criticisms of sort of his influence over hip hop, which I don't think is his fault, but is a fault of the music industry and of kind of latent American racism and things. But I now don't think it's his fault. But I would say when it comes to the diss track and when it comes to anything involving rap history, he sort of does have a hyperfixation on it, right? He sort of is like a classic nerd whose nerd interest was learning everything about rap. When he does a diss track, it's like he's like, I'm sure he's aware of the history of the dozens, even as like a white guy from the Midwest. I know he's aware, absolutely know he's aware of everything between Tupac and Biggie, and that he's probably spent a lot of his youth obsessing over, right? So when he does a diss track, he's thinking, I need to use my vocabulary to like destroy this person. The reason that that's relevant, I think, is because every time you talk about diss tracks, people will say, oh, Eminem ended this person's career with a diss track. I don't think that's entirely true when people say that. Usually when we say that, it's about rappers who are never going to be that famous anyways. But I do think it's true that like when he does a diss track, I think it can feel so dispiriting to some rappers that they just hang back. Ja Rule's career was definitely wounded by being dissed by Eminem. Cannabis, who is a lyrical rapper, a great wordsmith, kind of classic wordplay, nerdy rapper, was probably never going to be a big star. He was a little too nerdy and a little too esoteric, but his career was wounded by Eminem doing Cannabis. Everlast already kind of lost some legitimacy in the genre, but Eminem does those string of diss tracks. Fred Durst, I would argue that Fred Durst had a little bit of legitimacy in the hip-hop sphere as well as the rock sphere, and I think part of the reason he lost that is because he was pretty mercilessly mocked by Eminem.
Well, also another one, and this is one that people bring up all the time, but he was going to pivot to another genre eventually, but MGK as well. You know, that was another person who they said his rap career was ruined by that. And, you know, it's one of those things where I hate MGK. I think he's just a detestable
human
artist,
being.
Detestable person, detestable human being. I mean, we were talking about pedophiles at the beginning of the show, David. He's objectively a pedophile, but that's not here nor there. That's like one of the myriad of things wrong with MGK. But like that diss track, I think he probably listened to that and probably thought, haha, whatever. And then he was going to pivot to being a pop punk guy eventually anyways. Like, I don't think it had really anything to do with his rap career ending, but at the same time,
it was good timing.
It was absolutely good timing. And that was just another one that obviously, like Eminem diss tracks that ruined their fucking career, quote unquote, was MGK. And obviously we know MGK is doing better than ever as a pop punk artist. I mean, well, better than ever. I mean, his pop punk is, holy shit, it's bad even by modern pop punk standards. It's fucking terrible. Like, he is one of the worst vocalists in popular music I've ever heard. He is a terrible vocalist. I have more fucking vocal range than him. He's that bad.
He's awful. And I think his pivot away from rap and towards pop punk, like you, Taylor, I don't think it was because Eminem released Kill Shot, but I think that for the average listener of popular music, when you listen to Kill Shot and then you look at the fact that right after that he pivoted to doing pop rock, you're like, oh yeah, like of course he did. It probably almost worked out better that Kill Shot came out right before he pivoted, because now no one's asking when he's gonna rap again. So you get this thing where late in these early 2000s, diss tracks are maybe the most mainstream that they've been up to that point. Eminem, Biggie Smalls, all those kind of West Coast, East Coast few guys, they have some pretty commercial. You talked about No Vaseline. Dre had Fuck With Dre Day. You know, all the NWA guys are getting their licks into each other. These are fairly commercially successful, but they're still like kind of inside baseball. So by the late 90s, early 2000s, diss tracks are sort of becoming, rappers do this thing where they diss each other back and forth in songs, and some of them really go in on each other. And it kind of becomes a thing that's known. Of course, as you mentioned, new metal acts start getting in on it, and they kind of start using the vocabulary and the presentation of a hip-hop diss track, even though they're rock and roll bands, right? But I kind of want to bounce forward just a little bit, because this is the state that diss tracks are in for most of the 2000s, Actually, I would say a little calmer than the 90s diss tracks, because after the murders of Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur, rap feuds, I'm going to say they do kind of chill out. I think once the mainstream rap scene escalates to that point where two of its brightest stars are murdered, you do sort of see feuds settle down a little. I mean, they're still angry, they're still competitive. Jay-Z and Nas, of course, are going at each other hard all throughout the 90s and 2000s. It kind of stays there, right? Other than a few little scuffles, you don't, on the mainstream level, you don't see artists murdering each other, possibly allegedly murdering each other anymore. But what you see in the 2000s is everyone starts to see the diss track as this symbol of drama. And it almost sort of comes up at the same time as reality TV. There's this voyeuristic thing to watching like Eminem and Ja Rule or whoever go back and forth. It's like you're watching a boxing match now, which, is fun and is relatively harmless as, viewing competitions go. But then in like the 2010s, Taylor, you start to see this weird thing where non-rappers realize that if they have an enemy and they want to get attention and they want to talk down about their competition, that they can hire a producer and they can make a diss track. And we get this weird trend for a while. And I was not in this scene online. This was not the type of content I was consuming in the late 2000s, early 2010s. YouTube drama diss tracks. It's such a weird mutation. It's so separate from hip hop as a culture. Do you know anything about the YouTube drama diss track thing?
I know a little bit about it, but when I think of YouTube rap, I think of epic rap battles of history, to be honest with you. That's what
you think. I'm going to say, I don't like epic rap battles of history. I think it's cringe. I've always thought it was cringe. I had friends that liked it, and I was like, yeah, that's cute, and it is kind of cute. But, like, I'm not going to watch a bunch of it, it's whatever. That has more in common in its substance and its technique with traditional diss tracks and rap battles. It has more influence and probably more respect for the genre and the culture than this. So the YouTube thing, you might think that it's ironic, right? You might think it's YouTubers, like these white kind of drama YouTubers, I'm going to make a diss track and they're being kind of funny. No. Jake Paul and Rice Gum released several very bad, mediocre diss tracks back and forth about each other, where they talked about each other's personal lives and each other's YouTube comments and each other's view counts. There's a guy who I actually am only familiar with because of research for this episode, but he's considered one of the preeminent YouTube rappers, KSI. Are you familiar with that name at all?
Hilariously enough, Brian, the fact that you're not familiar with KSI, when we talked about YouTuber diss tracks, like the first people I thought of was Jake Paul and KSI. So that's fucking hilarious to me. And to be clear, I'm not a huge fan of KSI. Like, I think his content is very lowbrow. I'm a huge fan of his soft drinks. I think they're the best soft drinks on the fucking market, along with Jake Paul. Well, no, that was Logan Paul, I think. But either way, at the same time, like when you said KSI, I was like, oh yeah, I knew he was going to mention KSI because his rap career is hilarious. Talk about middling. That guy is like the perfect 3 out of 10 rapper. Like, holy shit, that guy is not good. That guy's not fucking good at all.
I listened to a bunch of his songs. First, I listened to all these YouTube diss tracks.
KSI is the most British rapper of all time. That's all I'll say. He's very British.
There is like British drill and shit that he's ripping off, but he's like the worst type of British guy ripping it off. First, I listened to a bunch of the YouTube diss tracks. This sucks. This is fucking cringe. This is awful. This also is like people who have no place in hip hop, who have no place in its traditions, have no interest in being part of those traditions. They've just adopted the diss track because they know it'll farm drama and get attention, right? But then I thought maybe some of them are really good. Maybe some of them are. I think if I were as a non-rapper and content creator, like I'm going to do a rap song, first of all, I'd try to make it funny because I'm a nerdy white guy. I would hire a producer and maybe I would try to make it kind of good somehow, right? But they don't. Fine, they're not rappers. KSI is the one of these guys who clearly sees himself not as a YouTuber who occasionally raps, but he's like, I'm also a rapper. You can tell that's part of his self-perception.
Yeah, no, he's trying very hard to be like an actual, like legitimate, like musical artist, but that adds a lot of the cringe to it because there's nothing fucking there. Exactly. He is a rich YouTube celebrity who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars due to his YouTube career and also due to his extremely toxic soft drinks at the same time. You know what I'm saying? He was, I think, also involved with that Lunchly debacle that happened a few years back.
Oh, yes.
So he's poisoning the minds and bodies of brain poisoned, like, children on the internet. The only thing he's not doing is abusing these kids sexually, as far as we're aware of. He's giving these kids, like, brain poison, and he's feeding them actual poison at the same time. Like, it's fucking wild. Like, who knows? Maybe he is the Black British Jeffrey Epstein, for all the fuck we know. I don't fucking know. His rap career, as you said, is just so boring and so middling, and every time I listen to him, I think of those like Instagram reels and like YouTube shorts or whatever, where it's always like a British rap thing where they talk like somebody from the 50s in like a British accent. Like,
Yep.
that's what he sounds like. He's so British. And like at the same time, like I'm not even necessarily saying that's like the worst shit ever. Like there's certainly some corny elements to that could be enjoyable, but he's very clearly trying to be like an impressive artist, and it's just not. It's so bad.
Yeah,
It's so terrible.
well, because he has no reason to. He has no actual inspiration to need to do that. So what's interesting to me, I guess, is that for a generation of people, probably older Zoomers, a lot of them, I do think, more recently, people who are younger than me, tongue-in-cheek, harken back to, I remember the days of YouTuber diss tracks. So I think for a lot of people, that was like an early exposure to like rap battles, to diss tracks and things, is as a thing, not a part of the hip-hop tradition or of like black oral tradition, but yeah, of like online drama. So we're now several years out from the Kendrick-Drake feud, which I did consider when that was going on, doing an episode about it. I'm glad we didn't, because what we're doing now, which is an analysis of the concept of the diss track, is a little bit, I think, more in our wheelhouse. I think the reason that the Drake-Kendrick thing, for so many people who've never listened to Drake or Kendrick before, followed that, is because I do think it was a long time coming. Like, I think a lot of people within hip-hop and a lot of people within popular music, and just a lot of people in general, were just like kind of been waiting for someone to really lay into Drake, because you just got sick of him. People just get fucking sick of this corny guy, right? But the other thing is that I think it kind of bridged different angles of the diss track, because you've got Drake, who loves some music and he's got some influences and he's always putting out music. I don't know the guy, but he's doing a sparring match, a verbal spar with another big star in hip hop as a form of content, right? He was thinking, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to get some drama content out and do these tracks. And I think that that's how people followed it, because they were releasing these tracks, one after another over the course of a day after each other, which pre-social media would have been unheard of. Used to be that you'd release a diss track and then your nemesis would release it maybe 7 months later, their response. So this thing where artists release things within a couple days of each other, a few hours of each other, is still pretty fresh. It's still pretty exciting. The other thing is that, well, there's an element, especially I think on the Drake side, of this sort of drama farming, clickbait, like we're getting people riled up online. You also have, particularly more from people following Kendrick, this idea that like, oh no, this isn't like a YouTube diss track. This is like a classic. Like Kendrick is doing something that is in line with the Dozens over the course of the 3 tracks. Well, 4 tracks, but there's like 3 main tracks that kind of follow a narrative, right? That's Euphoria, Meet the Grams, Not Like Us. And it's kind of, from the outside as a fan, but also just like someone with an interest in the history of music and kind of lyricism and things, it is clear that he kind of was, I think, making a statement through those 3 tracks and the way they unfolded, not just about Drake, but kind of about how he perceived the state of hip hop. And he was using the diss track, which again is one of the oldest, like it predates hip hop by literally hundreds of years, right? So he's kind of like keying into all of this to strip down this one person, but also like everything about popular music and popular rap that he doesn't like. And I think that made it pretty hard to ignore, because it had been a while since we'd gotten a diss track like that. There had been some notable and even some great diss tracks in the 2010s. Pusha T did another great Drake diss track, The Story of Adidas, but even that is more, it's kind of specific and it's kind of drama farmy. For like Kendrick to do this series of tracks that are almost like taking the format of, I'm releasing these online over the course of a few hours of each other, and they're kind of capitalizing on all the online drama, but the actual format, the way that he produces them, the way that he articulates them, has more to do with like a 90s diss track. I think that was really compelling for a lot of people.
No, absolutely. I think that's definitely, I would say, the cultural zenith of the diss track in the modern era, I would say. And I think that leads perfectly into the conclusion of this episode, because we've been recording for quite a while. Brian, do you have any final thoughts before we get to the end of our episode here and to our pluggables?
So this is a hard thing to have, like, I guess, a summarial final thought on. If you have no, like, awareness, if you're listening to this for whatever reason, you have no awareness of, like, the diss track as a format, which I can't imagine. I don't know where I would say, I know there are people who've made chronological playlists of, like, historical diss tracks. People who've done playlists of their favorite diss tracks of all time. I don't know that that's necessary. If you have any interest in, like, hip-hop, then you know what a diss track is. But if you're interested in some kind of more advanced or some more in-depth reading about it, Hip Hop Family Tree, the graphic novel by Ed Piskor, where he discusses, not at length, but throughout he discusses diss tracks and battle raps and the mechanics. There is the Book of the Dozens, which has multiple authors and is kind of part historical essay and part oral biography biography of the evolution of the dozens, basically as far back as we can trace it from West Africa to the 1960s, 1970s. That's if you want a more academic and kind of headier look into like the elements that make up what we now call the diss track. That's a really good place to start. If you're listening to this and you love a good diss track, especially if you really, really don't like me, please record Millennials, our old diss tracks. We'll evaluate them on the podcast by which ones hurt our feelings the most. We look forward to hearing from you.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. If you have a diss track you want to make for us, please send it in because we love it. It's more content. We need to have more haters. All your haters will be your waiters at the table of success, as Eric Adams famously said, the former mayor of New York and current, I believe, Albanian citizen said. But either way, my final thoughts on the diss track, like as somebody who's not super familiar with the history of it, this was very enlightening. As somebody who's a fan of the rock genre that probably has the most diss tracks I could fucking think of, it's certainly something that I have listened to over the years and didn't even realize there were diss tracks. Like it's Spit It Out is one of those songs that you would never guess is necessarily a diss track on anything specific. It's just kind of a generic like kind of style on the haters kind of song. But you know, at the end of the day, I think it's interesting to have like an entire subgenre of especially rap, like I said, where you talked about how it's like good natured, but it's kind of turned into, I would argue, a very caustic style of criticism of your enemies in a way. And I thought that was the most interesting element to it because like I said, I never thought that the idea of a diss track would have ever been lighthearted. Like that to me in the modern context is just so alien. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just something I just never would have thought of. But you know, speaking of the positives and negatives and the dissing and disrespect that we do to each other, that ends our episode and our topic for this week, I should say, before we get into our pluggables. So let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, you can follow us and subscribe to us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as I would say within maybe the last 8-9 fucking episodes now, I have been plugging my personal channel, Tailoring Your Budget. Now, I still don't have any content up at the moment. I just got back from an international vacation, and as well, I just got out of a sickness from that international vacation I just took. So needless to say, I'm a little bit behind when it comes to content making and just general living. So I want to hit the ground running on that fairly soon once again. I'm a very busy man, even though I'm an unemployed bum. I'm a very fucking busy man, but eventually I will make short and long form content for Tailoring Your Budget, which is a personal finance YouTube and TikTok and Instagram channel where I will detail various ways you can save money, various budgeting advice, you know, various life advice that is practical and non-reactionary. Because as I've said on a few episodes now, the personal finance space on the internet is overwhelmingly reactionary and chud-coded, and I want to do the exact opposite of that because the 99% of us want actual financial advice. It doesn't have to be like, oh yeah, well, you know, if you want to save money, you basically can never go out to eat, and if you do, you should feel like a piece of shit for it. Like, I'm not going to fucking do that. We don't need shaming when it comes to personal finance. We really fucking don't.
How do I get a Bugatti?
If you're at 25 and you don't have a Lambo yet, you should seriously ask yourself why that is.
I additionally need advice. Teach me how to drive. Help me get my learner's permit, and then teach me how to drive my Bugatti.
Exactly, Brian. I feel like I might need to show you how to Dougie real quick first before you get to learning how to drive. Didn't that guy go to prison? I'm pretty sure he did. The Teach Me How to Dougie guy, I'm pretty sure went to prison.
They're teaching him how to Dougie right now. He's getting a different kind of $5 footlong, if you know what I mean.
But there was some like pop rapper from like the mid 2010s.
Well, Sean Kingston.
No, like this guy like murdered somebody. Like
probably the Teach Me How to Dougie guy.
I think it was the Stanky Leg guy. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like I said, I want to have practical, non-reactionary advice. So please subscribe and follow me on those accounts if you want to have practical, non-reactionary financial advice when I upload that content eventually. And as well, talk about non-reactionary favorite content creators of ours. Of course, we've been plugging the Lucifer and the Father campaign for quite a while. You know, of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series. You know, last time I checked, they're still in post-production for episodes 2 and 3 of the Lucifer and the Father campaign. So send money to them today so they can finish up post-production in a reasonable time frame. And are there any updates?
So I talk to Scott pretty regularly. We check in with how production is doing, how the podcast is doing, to just touch base. You know, we both watch a lot of movies, back and forth on our thoughts there. There definitely are a lot of developments regarding Lucifer and the Father in particular, but also just in general, there's some really exciting and really intriguing, some big things coming up for both Sean and Scott, just Lucifer and the Father, but with their careers in general. There's a little bit of it that I've shared with Taylor. There's a little bit of it that I've shared on the pod. We are going to have Scott on very, very soon. I'm going to let him kind of divulge, you know, the biggest things, but I will say the series Lucifer and the Father, you know, it's in post-production. Post-production can be a pretty long process, but the episode is done. It's just about ready ready to go. They've just got to tighten stuff out. They've got to figure some stuff out. But they've got a lot of big ideas, some of which are just ideas, but some of which they're actively, I think, already working on shaping, both for future episodes and for other projects. Definitely have things developing. Scott's gonna, I don't want to say when exactly. I talk to Scott pretty regularly. He's been pretty open to the idea of coming on, doing a checkup with us, letting us know what's up with him, what's up with Sean. As listeners will know, he's very knowledgeable about, especially like 90s action adventure films. He's got a lot of insight, both as an independent filmmaker and writer, but also just as a lifelong fan. So we're going to have him on very soon. He's going to fill us in much better than I possibly could.
Absolutely, and we can't wait for that. And you're talking about things we can't wait for. You know, of course, we've been plugging this pretty much since it's happened as well, but the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund. I don't believe there's been any updates in the trial as of last month since we recorded here, but of course, as we always say, Luigi Mangione is completely innocent. Not even not guilty, completely innocent of all charges. He did not do that. He was not involved in any way in the Brian Thompson assassination. He's cool as shit. He needs our fucking support, and the federal government and two state governments are trying to railroad him to try to make it seem like he is the one who did it, which once again, he absolutely did not. Because, you know, that's the thing. If the government says somebody killed somebody, can we really take that seriously at this point, especially when it comes to a high-profile assassination? Like, let's be honest here, the fucking blue sky Will Stansel alleged assassin at the White House Correspondents' Dinner that happened recently. Like, let's be honest. Oh boy, that guy has a lot to talk about. I mean, we could talk about cringe millennial. Maybe when that happens and that goes to trial, we'll talk about that fucking idiot. Because Jesus Christ, that guy is so insanely cringe. Did I send you the video where he is in a clip where he's like doing some inventor thing and Usha Vance is in the background? Like, come on, that's so much foreshadowing. The only funny Trump assassin in this Trump 2 term is Ryan Routh. That guy was hilarious.
Regarding Luigi, I want to say the fact that we aren't hearing this constant stream of crazy updates from the trial about what he did, the salacious evidence we have, what a cold-blooded, calculated monster we have, the fact that we aren't hearing much about the trial. If they had all this smoking gun evidence on Luigi, if they had all these ways to demonize him, they'd be putting it in all of our faces. The fact that we aren't hearing this and that he's getting, at this point now that the dust is settled, a relatively private trial, indicates that he is in a fairly good spot, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why you're not hearing that, and you're hearing every detail, like, every day that makes David look like he's more guilty than fucking ever. Like, literally every day there's some new detail where it's like, this motherfucker is going to be buried underneath the prison. But you're not hearing about that when it comes to Luigi, because there's just not nearly as much evidence. And in fact, I would argue there's frankly little evidence, once again, tying Luigi to the Brian Thompson assassination. But at the same time, like I said, there's a reason you're hearing that about David, but you're not hearing that about Luigi, because Luigi is completely fucking innocent. And as I forgot to mention earlier, but I will mention this along with the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund, you know, just if you want to donate to both Luigi Mangione Defense Fund and the Lucifer and the Father campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just showing us that you donated, and we will, within good reason, about 10, 15, 20 bucks match those donations, because we want both Luigi and Scott Shaw Roberts' dreams to become a reality. And, you know, speaking of having people's dreams become a reality, we have a Patreon, and we don't have any patrons at the moment, but become our very first patron today. You know, we have some amazing tiers when it comes to our content.
I have amazing tears every night.
I have tears coming out of my dick. They're white for some reason. But at the same time,
streaming.
But you know, talk about streams, right? Like stream of consciousness. When you're talking to your fucking normie coworker and you just saw something they did that really fucking pissed you off and you wanted to come up with a diss track talking about how cringe they were in the break room, listen to our podcast and you could have ideas on the history of diss tracks, and it would give you the confidence to come up with that diss track about Janice, who's always microwaving fucking tuna in the fucking break room and being like, yo, bitch, listen to this fucking song I made about you. You know, talk about tuna. You know, you're a fucking tuna-ass bitch, motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like, you come up with an amazing diss track about that, and you would have that content already if you just became a patron of ours, and you'd get every episode 48 hours early, because we always say the first 48 hours are the most important.
If you donate to the Patreon, you'll get every episode 48 hours early. Think about what you could do having the knowledge that we bestow upon you for an additional 48 hours. Imagine going into your workplace. Imagine saying to your fellow coworkers, do you know about the dozens? Do you know about epic rap battles of history? You could be the first person to say to your cute microbangs coworker, did you know that epic rap battles of history actually had more in common with traditional hip-hop culture than the YouTube diss tracks of the early 2010s? And she'll say, I didn't know that, but I'm so glad you told me. Let's go out. But that's not happening to you because you're not donating to our Patreon.
Exactly. That's the fucking thing. Like, if you want that perfect 4 out of 10 work baddie with barcode bangs at your GameStop part-time job, that's the thing is that you need to listen to and subscribe to our podcast because you will get the most info to just rizz up that 4 out of 10 GameStop baddie. You 100% will get that advice from us. I promise you. You can get that written in stone, and if you don't get that 4 out of 10 GameStop baddie, you will get your money back. We can put that in legal writing.
Let's not get carried away here. If it's our fault that it doesn't work, sure. If you can prove that it's specifically our fault that it didn't work for you, sure.
You'll have to sign an NDA before you fucking join our Patreon. Speaking of NDAs and people who should subscribe to NSAs, if you know what I mean, Brian, do you have any pluggables as well?
As always, you can follow me Instagram and Threads, JLo Biafra. You can also follow the podcast at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads, as well as the Facebook page Millennials Are Old. Just simple 3-word statement there. The best place to contact me in regards to the show, if you have a diss track you'd like to record about us, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, if you hate us, if you want to dox us, if you want to do a Gamergate on us, if you feel like we are soy blue-pilled, if you feel like we are causing the
we're DEICRT woke retards.
Yeah, we're woke retards. Message us on Instagram, Millennials Are Old Pod. That is, if you have feedback, if you have suggestions, if you want to hunt me down and get me, that is the most accurate way to get a hold of me, to strike fear in my heart, or to make me consider your probably very good opinions. We love all of our listeners.
No, abso-fucking-lutely. We love our fucking listeners. We would never disrespect them. And, speaking of people we would never disrespect, Brian, I want to respect my bed by falling asleep in it. I will not track my shoes into my bedroom because that's fucking weird. Why would you put shoes on your bed? But hey, what do I know? But either way, we will respect our bed and fall asleep like good soy-cucked millennials. Would you do that, Brian, as well?
Well, actually, I just took a big spoonful of Gorilla Mind protein powder. Mind is raring. I just took a fistful of ginkgo biloba. I'm going to be up all night, rapping in the mirror, writing diss tracks, writing bars, writing metaphors and similes. Basically, just taking down all of my enemies, everybody in my head who's got me pissed off. Wish I could just take down a pig. Watch out, because I got those ginkgo biloba blood-filled brain supplements in me, and I'm the next swagged out white boy.
Hell the fuck yeah. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight. And to all of our swagged out white boys, keep on rocking. So have a good night, everybody.